Ladies and gentlemen, I know we are short for time. All that I would like to say is that I would like to compliment the Ambedkar Center for Justice and Peace for organizing Ambedkar Centenary celebrations. As an Indian representative here, Government of India's representative here, I'm very happy to know that Dr. Ambedkar is remembered so far away from his homeland. And as long as this is there, the voice of the oppressed or the injustices done in the society would be brought to the forefront, and in due course, I suppose, would be removed. Dr. Ambedkar, you must have, since the celebration started since morning, and I know that a lot of people must have spoken about him and about the work he's done. Undoubtedly, he was one of the greatest sons of India who worked for the people, and he was the architect, the founder of the Indian Constitution, which is a very elaborate document and which takes into account the multiplicity of Indian subcontinent, maybe racial, language, cultural, whatever that be. And all these things are incorporated in the Constitution. Particularly, there are articles or there are provisions which take care of or attempts to take care of the people who are not so fortunate. And there are such special provisions in the Constitution which does that, like reservations of seats in the university, in the jobs, and things like that. I think these are all incorporated in the Constitution because of the work of Dr. Ambedkar, because he was a man who was a visionary, who could look beyond the present into the future, and taking all that into account, incorporate what was required to bring up the have-nots, so to say, to a certain level where they enjoy the fruits of democracy. So I'm extremely happy, and I'm very happy to see all of you here on this Sunday afternoon to be participating in these centenary celebrations. And since we are all waiting for the keynote address by the Honorable Member of the Provincial Parliament from Manitoba, I would say thank you very much.
I'm very happy to be here today. I was invited by the Premier to come here today and to be part of this gathering because of my work with the Temiagam Anishinaabe. About a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago now, I came out of jail from having spent some time there of working towards the rights of the native people in the Temagami area, and I was very proud and happy to do so. I have two letters here. I think they're both in the green booklet you have, so I'll only read the one from the Premier. And I saw the Premier on Thursday, and he especially reminded me to wish you well, and he sent these greetings. Ambedkar Centenary Celebration. I am happy to greet everyone gathered here to honor the centenary of the birth of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar efforts on behalf of the rights of women and of all members of the untouchables living in India have directly benefited the lives of many millions of people. His outstanding contributions deserve recognition and respect from anyone concerned about fundamental human rights. I'm sure this conference and celebration have promoted a fruitful discussion on human rights. Best wishes, Bob Ray, Premier of Ontario. Thank you very much.
In it, to set the stage for the presentations this morning, I will first say that we're fortunate to have four presenters with considerable experience and background around not only Dr. Ambedkar, but in their own right with respect to the other key issues, the issues of untouchability, of human rights, and the struggle for human rights and for justice. I'd like to say that, first I'll just say who the panel is, just to reconfirm that who is here, and that's Dr. Y.N. Cly from the University of Regina, Professor Arun Mukherjee from New York University, Professor Leila Dushkin from Kansas State, and Professor Joseph O'Connell from the U of T, who rounds out and is from the institution that in fact owns this building, and we're very grateful for the use of the building. Just a bit of background about the origins of the conference. The conference, of course, has one obvious origin, and that's that it's the centenary of the birth of Dr. Ambedkar, who was, as you all know, an untouchable in India, who rose to considerable prominence and stature by virtue of his intellect, his education, and his hard work and dedication. And it's quite fitting, I think, that not long after celebrating a major anniversary in the birth of India itself, that attention be paid to one of the fathers, to use a still current but slightly sexist term, fathers of India, in his contributions in writing the Indian Constitution. And it's my view, and I am not an India specialist, my work is on Third World in general, on Latin America and the Caribbean in particular. I have been in India, I've been in the Indian subcontinent, and so I have some familiarity. My view is that the time is right at a number of levels for a conference on Dr. Ambedkar, and I see this as the first of many events, the planting of a seed, as it were, that I suspect will grow and grow and grow. I've seen it before. I've worked with groups that have started with conferences where one group I worked with, their first two conferences had absolutely nobody attending, after considerable organization and bringing in people from Europe and so forth. And the group now is the government of the country. I'm talking about SWAPO and Namibia. So I have an eternal optimism about the ability of good ideas and good works to resurface. So that's part of what an academic environment is about, to carry on the dialogue about difficult activities, difficult ideas, and difficult concepts. And certainly the topics that we'll be discussing this morning are not easy. We're celebrating the centenary of the birth of a man who was a considerable thinker and doer, while at the same time witnessing that there's a considerable amount yet to be done. The issue of human rights is on the agenda around the world. It's certainly extremely important within the context of Ambedkar's own country, India, soon to be the most populous country in the world. And it's one of those issues that if we're not careful, if we don't discuss it, if we don't think it through, we're apt to do things rashly and wrongly. And I say that recognizing that action should be sooner than later when it comes to questions of human rights and human justice. So my own involvement in this goes back over the last several years of talking with the person who's really the driving force behind this, and that's Mr. Yogesh Vahade. He and I have talked about this and other activities we hope to flow from this, activities my heart is very close to, actually grassroots projects, helping sort of local development projects. And the idea of holding this kind of conference at this time then was attractive to me because I think it's time to begin organizing more actively within Canada. And I don't necessarily mean politically there, I mean culturally, socially, in terms of consciousness raising and awareness around the issues of human rights around the world. I'm not going to make a long introduction now, other than sort of thank those who've helped organize. We'll formally thank later on. But I'll just, before I introduce the first presenter, close with a note of concern, and that's that just 3 short months ago, in the middle of and toward the end of the Gulf crisis and the Gulf War, there was a very strong concern that we learn something from that war and that we come out of it with a commitment to slow down the arms race, to halt the arms race. And we were variously reminded that 7 days worth of Gulf War expenditures would have been enough to, in the short term, solve the problems of famine in northern Africa and the Horn of Africa, not to solve it permanently, but as a palliative for the short run. We are now just 3 short months away from there, and already both, in the major armaments-producing countries, and Canada is not major, but among them, the public debate now is over what are acceptable arms sales, as opposed to what should we be doing with the resources that heretofore went into arms sales. So I think that it's time to move the human rights and human welfare issues forward on the agenda. If nothing, I mean, the reasons for that are obvious, but I think the timing is important because it's singularly unfortunate that Western economies, this one included, are in the economic doldrums and are again turning to techniques that are not going to benefit the poor of the earth, are not going to benefit the plight of untouchables in India or the starving in the Horn of Africa and Northern Africa, but policies that are designed to generate export trade for very select sections within the industrial countries of the West. So I think if we fight that fight, or if we worry about those things from the perspective of how do we redirect the resources, we probably won't get very far. If we do what this conference is about, if we spend our time thinking about human dignity and human rights and how these relate to the plight of peoples around the world, and what we can do to empower peoples to take their future in their own hands as opposed to being, for the most part, victimized by our activities, then I think there's hope. And I always feel there's hope. I'm a resigned optimist in that sense. And I'd like to think of this conference today as the planting of a seed, the lighting of a candle, to illuminate first and foremost the hope that's there, and second, to cast a critical, in a sense, academic light at this session on the circumstances that generate and perpetuate much of the tragedy that we see in the world, much of the tragedy around human rights. Here, the focus, of course, will be on untouchability and the untouchables in India, but that's just the first focus. By the middle of the day, we will be talking about refugees and the plight of women in certain circumstances. ELIJAH HARPER will bring it full circle and bring it home in terms of the circumstances of natives here and abroad. And I think that's our contribution. Beyond that, it's in the hands of those of you who are here, those who would like to help over the longer haul. But I think that's enough of the sort of sermon and introduction. What I'd like to do is say that we have the 4 presenters. We will take them in the order in which they've been listed here, and for the most part we have simply asked them to reflect on their work, reflect on the theme of the conference, and share their reflections with us. The plan has been to have the 4 presentations and then discussion, but I will time and moderate, and if it seems that we should have a break in the middle, then if that's the sense that I get, then we will have a brief break for questions. But if we can flow smoothly across the 4 and hold questions, we will do it that way. Okay, so I'd like to start by welcoming Professor Cly as the first presenter.
I think that it is a great honor for me to be here and to have this opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the Birth Centenary of Dr. Ambedkar. As a specialist in human rights law, international law, and as a very concerned activist in the promotion of human rights in the North America and in all parts of the world, I'm especially appreciative of the work that has been done by Dr. Ambedkar, and of course of those who have followed in his footsteps to make us and the world aware of his work I asked myself in coming here, why is it so important for us all over the world, why is what's going on here, what's going on all over India in behalf of the untouchables, the Dalit, so important for the rest of the world? And this is the answer that I came up with, basically. I guess it's a little bit from my perspective and from my experiences. In the 1960s, the Club of Rome, which is an international group of scientists that were brought together under the umbrella of the United Nations, warned us that the rate of change was increasing in an exponential fashion. That is to say, that history is speeding up. The time that we have to solve problems of mankind, world problematics, is likewise decreasing at an incredible rate. We have seen predictions of famine and great social disorder that accompany breakdown of economic systems, political, social systems. We have seen those predictions made in the late 60s. Now in the early 90s, we see famine in Africa. We see threats of famine in other parts of the world. We see social breakdown in Eastern Europe, etc., etc. So perhaps those warnings should be taken seriously. Now, these Club of Rome scientists were joined by a host of new voices, lending their support to the thesis that we live in a world in which we have to think about all aspects from a multidisciplinary and from an interdisciplinary approach in order to be able to solve the great crises that are facing us, such as population, pollution, militarization, the possibility of contamination of the Earth's atmosphere, etc., etc. All these problems have social basis. But in our global village, when a tragedy unfolds in any one part, it affects all parts. But in this world, in this spaceship Earth, that the maintenance of the spaceship Earth in a degree of sustainable development cannot be assured unless we are able to accelerate the rate of social change in keeping with the requirements that are being demanded in order to solve the type of problems that we are dealing with, that we are faced with. In the last decade, to encourage this social change, we have seen a movement for human rights on both national and international levels. And the movement in the last decade has had an intensity and an urgency unlike anything we have experienced in the past. Is this the method that we have chosen to effect the necessary social change? Has mankind finally come to appreciate and to understand the global importance of the human initiatives undertaken in behalf of human rights by such great men as Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar?
Is about the Pune Pact, and I need to give you just a little bit of a background about what this Pune Pact was for you to be able to understand what I'm going to be saying later on in my paper. In 1932, September 20, Mahatma Gandhi went on a fast unto death in Yarvada prison in Pune. And the fast was undertaken because he did not agree with the award of separate electorates or reservations for the elections of the untouchables or depressed classes candidates into the assemblies, parliaments, and so on. He believed that that was going to separate the untouchables from what he called the Hindu fold, and therefore it was a plot of the British government to divide and rule. And therefore he wanted the British government to withdraw that separate award because he believed that the untouchables did not need special protection, because he, on his own word of honor, was going to look after the untouchables' interests, as well as the Congress Party was going to look after that interest. And 4 days into the fast, after much running around by India's various leaders, Dr. Ambedkar was persuaded to sign an agreement with Mahatma Gandhi and agree to give up the separate electorates. But he didn't want to give up those separate electorates without getting something else in return. So what he got in return was what we call joint electorates, so that the untouchable candidates were going to have reserved seats, but within the electorates reserved for the Hindu community. So that is what happened in what is known as the Pune Pact. And I just want to share with you some of the more other complications within this very complex story. I must admit that I did not know anything about the Pune Pact until December 1989. As to Dr. Ambedkar, all I knew about him, rather vaguely, was that he was the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, and that the upper caste Hindus in Maharashtra were trying to get his book, Riddles of Rama and Krishna, banned. Although my entire school life had been spent reading about the heroes of the freedom movement in my textbooks, celebrating their birthdays and acting on the school stage in plays about them, Dr. Ambedkar's name had never figured in any one of these diverse activities related to my schooling. And so, until December 1989, my consciousness about Dr. Ambedkar's role in the progress of Indian civilization was absolutely hazy. My ignorance, of course, is not just because of my individual failure. It is an example of how the dominant class or race in a country exercises its power to erase the history of resistance to its domination. Just as in this country, Canada, history has been defined as the settling of Canada by two founding races, groups, cultures, nations. They're hard put these days to choose the right word. So in India, modern history is the story of a handful of Congress leaders wresting India's independence from the British colonizers through their acts of individual heroism, such as fasts unto death and long sojourns in British jails.